Well, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everyone to this hui. It's great to have you here online joining from around the country. It's been nice in the chat. We're putting what the weather's like and what's one thing that's keeping us hopeful. So really nice to see those comments and even people joining from overseas as well. Welcome everyone. Nau mai, haere mai. So we're just going to kick off. I'm going to pass it to Jenny in a second, but thought I'd start with a little karakia. So if everybody can just take a deep breath in and out, and make sure that you're on mute as well. If you can, that would be great. Kia tau, kia tato, kia rite tato, kia u tato, kia whakaro nui kia tato, kia manawa nui, kia whakaute kia tato. Mauri ora ki te whare, tuturu whakamua, kia tina, homie, huie, taikie. So welcome everybody. It's really wonderful to have you here. That little karakia was basically drawing us all together. I know it's a virtual room, but here we are in this virtual space. So I'm going to hand over to Jenny, who's going to introduce us and get us started. And just make sure that you're on mute because we have quite a few people joining this call. And it would be great if you can make sure that you're muted. Jenny, over to you.
Well, kia ora everybody and welcome. It's really, really lovely to see you all. Ko Jenny Gill tōku ingoa. I know many of you on this call, some old friends I haven't seen for a while, and some new friends. So I have a long background in philanthropy and the not-for-profit sector, and I was absolutely delighted when Craig and Stephen asked me to facilitate the discussion that we had last week. And I think at the moment we've got over 640 people registered for today's session. So there's huge interest in this issue across the country. So welcome to you all. Please, if you have questions or comments, put them in the chat and we will do our best to respond either now or during the session, but we're not going to be able to, obviously with 600 people online, we're not going to be able to have an online discussion. What we've also done in preparation for this is tried to draw together what seem to be the most topical issues and areas of concern for people. So shortly I'll hand over to Craig and to Stephen to introduce themselves and then to start the discussion. Since we had our last podcast, IRD actually put out a discussion paper. I think it was the afternoon of the day we had our discussion paper. So I think that paper has at least clarified the areas that IRD and the government are looking at. And a number of you have been in various workshops and meetings with IRD, and I was actually in one last week. Philanthropy New Zealand also had a meeting with the Minister of Finance about 2 weeks ago. And one of the things that she said at that meeting is she wants examples of the possible impact of what's proposed in these moves. She reiterated that nothing is predetermined, and she's looking for submissions that outline the possible impact on charities and communities. So I think it's really, really important that we all put submissions in, even if you just focus on the section and the questions that impacts on your organisation, but don't assume that others will raise the issue that are of concern for you. And hopefully this session will help you if there are issues that you need help with thinking through. The other interesting thing that was said in the IRD session last week was that they indicated that they're leading to a budget announcement rather than legislation, but kind of heralded that there's a tax bill expected in August and that any changes might flow into that. But what I'm going to do now is ask Craig and then Stephen to introduce themselves, and then we're going to kick off with some high-level thoughts from them about what the issues are that they've been thinking about and the advice that they're able to give us as members of the sector. So Craig, can you introduce yourself and kick off, please?
Thanks, Jenny. Kia ora tātou, e te whānau, Craig Fisher, coming to you from lovely Whaingaroa, Raglan, and the day outside does look like that in my picture at the moment. I am a former financial auditor. I am a former standard setter for audit and ethical standards and things for accountants, and a long-term involved person in the for-purpose sector. And I currently sit on a number of boards of charities and other for-purpose organisations. So very passionate about our sector, the good that it does, and the need for all of us to actually speak up when there may be things that may adversely impact us. Over to you, Stephen.
Well, tēnā koutou katoa, everyone. No America ho no te tematanga, no ototahi toku kainga inai nei, e roia toku tunga mahi o Perryfield Lawyers, ko Stephen mo toku ingoa, no reira ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Yeah, it's real wonderful to be here. I was reflecting on this and just the chance for us to come together and have discussions. Like, if nothing else, isn't this amazing to see all of you who are doing such great work across the sector coming together and having conversations, because I think it's something we don't do enough. So my background, just briefly, you hear my accent, but I actually moved to New Zealand back in 1984. My father was a marine biologist, so we moved here when I was 7 years old. Grew up here in Otautahi, went to Canterbury University, have worked as a lawyer now for, hard to believe, but about 25 years. And I've worked offshore in London, Tokyo, Sydney, and now based back here for the last 9 years, really working with what I call for-purpose organizations. So that covers both charities and also businesses, but generally it's about more than profits. It's about purpose and impact. So I head up our impact team, and we help people from across the sector with a wide variety of issues and things. And I love collaborating. That's one of my main focuses in life, is who I can collaborate with, because then I can learn from them as well. And Craig has been a wonderful collaborator for the last few years. And so we came together to pull together this paper here, which hopefully you've all got a link to. And now it's led to this session. So that's a little intro on me. Maybe back to you, Jenny.
I'll mute, Jenny.
Craig, you are hot from starring on Radio New Zealand. So would you like to kick off the discussion with the high-level issues as you see them, please?
Sure, thank you. Well, as Jenny mentioned, we ran a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and actually on the afternoon of that day, a consultation paper was released. So that was fantastic, because one of our concerns initially was there appeared to be proposals for change with no consultation. We have a consultation paper. It's actually a good paper. It's narrowed the issues of concern quite considerably. And it is also quite supportive in some ways of the sector. So I think that's good. There's some good explanation in there. And, you know, just say the words tax paper and most people want to run the other direction quite fast. It's actually not that bad a read, which is good. However, I guess the reason that I was on Radio New Zealand this morning was that I've publicly made some statements around this potentially being the thin end of the wedge. And by that, I mean, this is potentially inroads into the government support of the charitable sector. And even if it is relatively narrow areas at the moment, does that mean that that will grow to other areas in future? I'm also reminded that we live in a democracy. And the whole point of a democracy is that you need to speak up to have your voices heard. You may not always get the answer that you want, but the voices being heard is important. And it's important that I think many people in our sector do actually speak up and make submissions. We are a sector that's characterized by a lot of organizations, a lot of very small organizations, a lot of under-resourced organizations, or organizations that are focused on doing the mahi, doing the work, addressing their charitable issues, rather than keeping their heads up about what might be changing to the sector. However, this is an important issue, so you know we really would stress to everyone making a submission on this would be great. The paper states in it that its objectives are simplifying tax rules, reducing compliance costs, addressing integrity risks, which are all really good objectives. But, you know, in my mind, the devil is in the detail. And part of the reason that I'm still very concerned about this is there seems to still be some confused thinking here. The paper talks in a number of places about abuse of the tax system. It doesn't give any uh, estimates, or there's no data backing up how large this abuse might actually be, which makes it very hard for people to clearly think about it then. And I'm likened to, the question, would you like fries with that? Well, the obvious answer generally is yes. But, if the second thing is the fries cost $1 million, it might change your mind. So context is everything. And I think it's really important that if it's being stated that there is abuse in certain areas, but possibly by some charitable entities, it's really important for people to understand what the scale of that is. And just, I guess, as a segue from that, a point I made on RNZ this morning when I was lucky enough to be interviewed by Catherine Ryan was that, in any population, unfortunately, there's 1 or 2% of rogues. The question then becomes, how do you deal with that? And what concerns me most about these proposals is that we appear to be taking a blanket approach using the taxation rules to try and address what may be some abuse from a very small number of entities, which possibly should be addressed through the charities regulator using our existing charities law. Because if there is abuse happening, that abuse will be funds not being used within the sector for their charitable purposes, which is the point of charities work. So I am still very concerned that we are appropriately identifying the issues, the ill that needs to be cured, and then secondly, understanding how big that issue is, and then thirdly, are we using the right means to actually address those issues? And that would be my concern from a conceptual level. But I'd like to pass over to Stephen because he made an excellent point, which we've put in the paper that we're sending out to everyone from today's webinar about how this is actually framed. So Stephen, over to you.
Oh, thanks for setting that up so well, Craig. I can grab that one. Yeah, and hopefully you've all received an email if you're here because you had to click a link, and attached to that email was this paper. So this is like a follow-up to our original paper. It looks kind of like this. And what we were doing in here, in this webinar, we're going to go through some of it. But the conceptual, the high level point from my perspective is that I do have some concern. The first point to note, though, is that this is an IRD issues paper. It's not actually the government's view. So it's just important that we remember the stage that we're at. And Jenny helpfully was saying probably there'll be an announcement in May and then something in August. So the wheels are turning and we have the ability to have a say. So you've heard it from the other two as well, but I'm going to emphasize, make sure that you are submitting, particularly from your context and your entity, and what would the impact be for you. And it might be that you look at it and go, well, the first 7 questions are nothing to do with me, but that number 8, that's the one I care about. So just want to encourage you to submit. And while I think it's good to submit as a whole sector, like peak bodies and things, that's important. I think the volume coming in from a diverse range of charities that are impacted is going to be really important. And I guess the conceptual thing that you're alluding to, maybe before I get to that, I do have a worry. This is like a children's story, and you know where I'm going to go with it, right? If you put a frog in the cold water, if you put a frog in the hot water, it's going to jump right out. Put it in boiling water, it's going to jump out. If you put it in the cold water and then heat it up slowly, it's going to stay there until it's too late. So I guess this is the alarmist side of it, but is there a case to be made that we're just tweaking a few things here, we're just taking away a few exemptions, we're just, adjusting, but then once you open that door, where does it stop? Where do you actually draw a line to say that's enough? And the conceptual framework, I just put it in the chat as a link to a post I did. And it's essentially in clause or part 1.4 of the consultation paper. There's a statement, and I just was reflecting on it and reframing it. So I'll put this in the chat once I finish talking as well. But it's 1.4. It says, every tax concession has a cost. That is, it reduces government revenue and therefore shifts the tax burden to other taxpayers. So that's like a conceptual way of thinking about tax concessions as a cost. So I just reframed it as every tax concession has a benefit. That is, it reduces government expenditure by empowering charities to have more impact at a lower cost than the government providing an equivalent service, and therefore reduces the tax burden to other taxpayers. So, it's like, how are you approaching this problem? What is it that you're thinking about? So hopefully it helps to think in that way. Jenny, I might throw it back to you.
Thank you. I just saw a question in the chat, which one of you might like to address, and it was, why doesn't charity services have the power and tools to deal with the so-called abusers? Would one of you like to respond to that?
Both Stephen and I actually sit on a sort of a pseudo advisory group or a users group for charities in New Zealand. So basically, we're there as people involved in charities that get to provide feedback on what might be happening with a very wide range of people. Um, I've been quite saddened and actually almost depressed, to be honest, at the last meeting when the lead of Charity Services was explaining the level of cuts that organisation has actually been exposed to. And it's not a large organisation already, given that they have both a regulatory function and a supportive educative function. I think they've done a good job over the years of actually their supportive educative function, and there's some great resources on Charity Services websites and helping charities. But I do wonder if they are appropriately resourced at the moment to actually carry out appropriate investigations where there is suspicions of abuse, which is one of their roles. And you can sort of look at that in the context of the last few years. We've had quite considerable cuts off across a lot of government entities.
Thanks. Stephen, do you want to
Well,
comment?
yeah, just to add, I think it's important to remember that I think Craig and I would both agree that we have a framework for regulating charities. There is safeguards. For example, to become one of the 29,000 charities, you have to prove that you're advancing charitable purpose. And it's not just a tick the box, like there's a process to go through. So there is, and then if something goes wrong, there are mechanisms to investigate and to take action. So I guess one of the things that we worry about, I'm going to borrow your phrase, Craig, but throwing a blanket over the whole sector to address what it actually, once you boil it down, is only a few instances, is something that, yeah, it's a problem we have with the consultation paper is that it doesn't really go into the detail of how many, where are the numbers? Show us what the impact actually is. Like it's talking in a conceptual way, but what are the numbers? What is the actual impact? And what would the flow on be of introducing new rules, new requirements for something that actually what you're really worried about is only a couple dozen of situations. It has that sort of feel to it.
Are we
Thank
using the
you.
right tool for the problem?
I think maybe we should dive into the paper and the paper that you've written. Which of you would like to kick off? Because there's clearly some issues that come up every time. The taxation of business income, donor advised funds, possibly the benefit tax.
Can I kick off, Craig, just because I think it's important. I'll let you do maybe some of the summary of the conceptual points, but some of you on the call might be saying, yeah, but this doesn't affect me. This doesn't impact me because I don't have a business. I don't have unrelated business income. But I guess my encouragement here is that I think it does affect all charities because the inroads that are being made have the potential to one day impact you as well. So on number 2, there's like a table and it sets out who we thought would be impacted. So we start with that all charities are impacted in some way because it's a framing about the role of charities in society itself, which we think is perpetuating a model of the Oliver Twist please, sir, can I have some more? Rather than go out, diversify your income stream for sustainable income. The others that are obviously affected are if there's charities that own businesses, because if you do own a business, that might be captured if it's an indirect income. So it's doing things that are unrelated to your purpose. Donor-controlled charities are going to be impacted. So this is where particularly could be a family or an individual sets up a charity and then there are links with commercial enterprises. In my experience, usually those involve subsidizing those charities back from the commercial enterprise. And then but there are always exceptions, and that's something Craig and I are conscious of. There's always the outliers. Charities that issue donation receipts. So that should be all of you, right? This is quite important. I think I don't want to all be negative either. This is a positive thing. They're suggesting that actually you'll be able to claim the amount that you've given as you give it rather than waiting until the end of the financial year. So that's a positive innovation that I think we should be submitting to say this is good. Then mutual societies, credit unions, vet services, science bodies. These are very specific, but some of you on the call are from these entities, and you should be seriously thinking through how is this going to impact our operations. Offshore charities are touched as well, and charities that have employees with FBT exemption, so fringe benefit tax exemption. So I'm just making the point that there's a lot of different parts of the sector that are impacted. Craig, maybe I'll pass to you to take it in terms of the conceptual side.
Yep. Well, just to add to what you've said there, Stephen, and a great run through. So, one, it wasn't quite as wide as we thought that it may have been, which is great. That's a real positive. Having said that, there's a couple of big issues in there. And I think the big issues, if I was to characterize them, would be those first two in terms of business income of charities and specifically unrelated business income, i.e. unrelated to a charity's business. And the second being donor-controlled charities. And the issue with that is concerns around related party abuse, effectively. If I look at the first one of those, I'm really quite concerned about the unrelated definition. Because if I think of a lot of charities where they are running businesses or trying to earn some income, may start off doing things that relate to the charity. And I'm thinking here, looking out at some lovely trees of a local environmental charity that grows native trees and does tree restoration. And I bought some trees off them at commercial rates. They make a small profit from that. That helps them do their mahi. Is that an unrelated business or is it related to their charitable purpose? You then look at a school that may be providing education and then also has some high fee-paying students from overseas to help fund their operations. Again, is that related or unrelated? Whenever you have to draw a line in legislation or regulation, things get very tricky. And in my former experience as an audit partner, I was forever coming across things where there are thresholds where people try and modify their lives or engineer how they're doing things so that they fit just below or just above a threshold to suit their purposes. So I am very concerned about the practical complexity of the definitions of what is unrelated in terms of business. Sanitarium keeps coming up, and I spoke about sanitarium this morning. I seem to keep getting sucked into that. The issue there, sanitarium is a business to earn income for the church. It is totally owned by the church, so all of its profits go to the church. However, if you look at that business, and it's something we mentioned on our previous webinar, that business actually does some good things as well, such as provides healthy food, such as donates over 9 million breakfast serves last year, such as running the Triathlon for Kids series, which I think Stephen said there's over 400,000 kids have actually been through now. So, how unrelated is even that business? It's doing some things which actually support healthy food and healthy lifestyles, which is something that the church as a whole supports. So I'm really vexed on this unrelated thing. And it also doesn't make any policy sense to me in terms of why you would look at unrelated and not look at related. active income versus passive income, from a policy person's thinking. Um, why would you say that passive is okay, but active is not okay? And then what's actually passive? So if I invest in shares through Forsyth Barr or JB Were, is that active or passive? How does it go? So it gets horribly confused. I think the problem here is that we've got into a issue of dealing with parts of the sector rather than stepping back from it and going, well, actually, we give charities in New Zealand tax exemption because it's about where the money goes. That's the issue. Ensuring that the money is going on charitable purpose rather than how they've actually earned it in the first place. So, yeah, I've sort of gone off on a tangent there, Jenny. Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay.
But I think it's an important tangent.
Thank you. There's lots of questions coming up in the chat that we can't answer, but clearly the issue of so-called passive income is a very important one, because if you think of the endowments of the community trusts, of family trusts, I mean, it's not specified in this document. I guess it gets back to your thin
End of
end
the
of
wedge.
the wedge question. There's also questions that you might want to address, Craig, in here about social enterprises, and would a social enterprise be potentially regarded as a business activity that's not related to the purpose?
So that's a really good question, and actually probably Stephen's a better one to talk to social enterprises than me, given he's done an awful lot in that space. A social enterprise is a business effectively with a social heart. It may not be charitable, though. It may just be a business which has much more in the way of concern about the wider environment of people, planet, place. Um, so the question to me from a charities and tax perspective comes back to, is the social enterprise owned by a charity? Or is it not owned by a charity, in which case it doesn't fall within this debate? Stephen, you might want to add to that.
Yeah, well, hipatai taku. So I have a question, and it's actually for the people who are watching us, because we want to make this as interactive as possible. And I love that the chat is got lots of comments and things. And I'd love to hear a little brief stories from some of you about the good that you're doing and the impact that you might see if these changes were put through. The reason is that maybe by starting to write in the chat, it will get your brain going so that you're ready to submit. So that's my ulterior motive here. But I'd love to hear some of this in the chat. Like, what are some of the things? What might the impact be on you? If you own a business, how would this impact you as a charity if you were taxed on that business? Just interesting to see that the chat can be used as a way to keep us interactive. So yeah, I wrote a book about social enterprise, so it's a topic that's dear to my heart. I think the framing of it comes back to, is it a charitable purpose that's being advanced through what's being done? So I've helped many charities set up groups or entities, so companies that they own 100%. So the charity owns it 100%. And generally, it will be doing something that advances the purpose of the charity. So, for example, if we want to help people who are having drug-related issues and getting off of drugs, and we set up a cafe that then employs them, like you can see that there's a direct link or a connection between what does the cafe do and what's the purpose of the charity. Where it gets trickier is if an investment is made into a company where there's not that easily direct line between the purpose of the charity and what the company is doing. And that might be because the company is set up to actually make money so that it can come back to the charity to do good. And that's the scenario that I think could be captured by what might be proposed or might come under. So that's where the issue is that I think there's a lot of charities that do have business interests or own a subsidiary where it's going to be harder to say there's a direct link to our purpose. Although this will be the gray area, right? How do we define what is related and what is unrelated? So, yeah.
Stephen, there's a great question in there. Is there any difference between owning a business versus operating a business, i.e. passive-ish return on investment versus active control. And I think that's a lovely example of the confusion in this whole space, because that would need to be defined. And I guess when I think that through, especially if a charity has invested a fair amount in setting up a business operation that then looks like it's going to be taxable, it's going to be seeking clarification of that from the Inland Revenue Department, seeking determinations. There's going to be lawyers and accountants involved. There's going to be cost involved in trying to get that clarity. So that's why it is problematic once you start splitting out various areas within the space, rather than taking a more holistic view, which we have now, which is if you are accepted as a registered charity, then your income, you are not taxed on your income, because that income cannot go out to private pecuniary gain, and because that income is being directed towards charitable purposes. And if there is abuse of that, then the appropriate addressing of that, I would suggest, is from Charity Services, DIA Charity Services, the regulator, to investigate that and make sure that whether or not the charity is actually acting appropriately, rather than using the tax rules to throw a blanket over every charity.
I think it's important to emphasise again that the Minister has said in at least 2 forums in the last 2 weeks, she wants to hear examples from the sector where what is proposed could directly negatively impact the work that you do. So there's a lot of concern coming up in the chat here, for example, about social enterprises, about op shops, charity shops. That comes up all the time. So I do think it's important that people unpick what they think the implications could be and actually outline them for both the benefit of IRD and the Minister. I mean, interestingly, the Minister is also working with Philanthropy New Zealand on a paper to encourage the growth of philanthropy in New Zealand, which is expected to be issued later in the year. So I think there's a kind of a balancing act for her in terms of the growth that she wants to encourage in the philanthropic sector anyway. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat as I'm...
No, that's good. And that's kind of the ironic thing, isn't it? Is that actually, I think we want to encourage innovation. We want to encourage sustainability. We want to encourage charities to think outside the box. And so would these sorts of rules allow that? Would they empower charities to do that? Or is it going to be more that conception of go out with the bucket and get donations? Like that's your traditional role, charities, where I would hope that we're willing to see a brighter future for charities where we actually are looking for innovative ways of doing things. In my mind, this may sound strange as a lawyer, but I'm kind of agnostic as to the entity type. I just want to see good being done, whether that's through a company structure or it's through a trust. Like that should be our main focus, in my view. So yeah, it's interesting. I'll throw, people like to pick the word pictures. So the other one that I would have is there a danger here of a reverse Robin Hood? In other words, we steal from the poor to give to the rich. So it could be that we end up going and introducing a number of complicated tax rules, complicated definitions that increase the compliance, when actually there would be other ways to increase revenue that should be examined before that. And also, we just don't know the size of the problem. So is it the right method to go and start looking at charities that are going to be this revenue stream? Craig, maybe you want to touch on this, but I'm pretty sure that there would be ways to structure things if it went through and you were taxed on the profits from a charitable company. For example, what if you just donate that amount that would have been profit to the charity, and therefore you're not actually going to be increasing the revenue anyway? Maybe you want to
Correct, Stephen. Yeah, that's one way of actually looking at this, albeit that charitable company, as I understand it, would then have to do a tax return, which is an increase in compliance costs. And What I think is really important is that any increase in compliance costs in our sector across the 29,000 charities means that that is money being used for compliance that is not then available for use for the charitable purposes. So that's why I'm very concerned about the real harsh impact of unintended consequences and an increase in compliance, because it directly steals, takes, whatever phrase you want to use, from the charitable purposes. And that's why I think any interventions need to be very carefully thought through before they are made. 29,000 different accountants trying to get their head around, does this impact me in our charity or not? That's a whole lot of time that could be going to more useful charitable purposes, I'd suggest. So unintended costs is a huge issue here.
Thank you. Stephen, can we just circle back to the accumulated surplus issue? Because it's come up a lot in the chat and you addressed it head on National Radio this morning. So can you take us back, basically explain the issue, and then, because one of the things I think we can do as individuals is actually talk to other people in the sector about this issue. And I'm finding in sort of, dinner party conversations that the $2 billion untaxed surplus actually comes up quite a lot. So I think it's important we're all armed for these discussions.
Okay, I'd just like to make a general apology here on air. I was unprepared for that $2 billion question. Personally, I found it so perverse and pathetic that I hadn't really thought about it too much. The line there is that the difference between income in the charitable sector and expenses in the charitable sector last year was 2 billion. So that must be 2 billion of untaxed profit. Wrong. So what that represents is donations from people. It represents, my mum leaving some money in her estate to a charity. It represents a whole lot of things. It represents lots of timing issues. I'm involved in a charity that's building a hospital at the moment overseas in Papua New Guinea. And we've had to raise a lot of money in the last couple of years in order to achieve that. So we've got a timing issue there. So to just simplistically say there's $2 billion worth of profit in the charitable sector is really annoying. Also doesn't take into account the fact that there is such a huge amount of volunteer time, pro bono and semi-pro bono time that is donated by thousands, hundreds of thousands of generous New Zealanders every day to charities that isn't costed. And I think there's a statistic that Stephen dug out of 1.4 million hours every week is donated by generous New Zealanders to the charitable sector. So well done, everybody. But that's not costed in that $2 billion. So if I was to even put the the minimum hourly rate on that, I'm sure that 2 billion will get a lot smaller really quickly. Sorry, Jenny, I've ranted so much there. I've gotten the point of that. Accumulation. Sorry, that was your question. Your question was on accumulation. So 2 billion is lovely, sensational media, but like everything, if you don't give it the true context, you don't actually understand what it means. Accumulated surpluses is an issue, and there was a good point that was made in the taxation paper, and the person that was on Radio New Zealand with me today, an eminent tax specialist, Jeff Nightingale, who was part of the good group of people on the tax working group back in 2018, 2019, they were concerned that there was a potential issue if charities were not taxed on their income, but then instead of applying that income for charitable purposes, it was just being accumulated within the charity, which got bigger and bigger and bigger assets, but the income from that hadn't actually been delivered. And part of the point of charitable exemption for charities is to assist with funds for charitable purposes being delivered to do the good work that charities do. So there is definitely a question around accumulation. And actually, as part of the review of the Charities Act that ran for, goodness me, 4 or 5 years or so, the question of accumulation was asked and whether there should be changes in the Act on that. the eventual situation was not any changes proposed to the legislation, but there is a requirement that's now in place from Charities Services that when a charity provides their annual return, that they will answer a question on accumulation. So if they have funds accumulated, they are now required to explain why they are accumulating them, what is the purpose of that. I think that's a very sensible idea because a big part of our control, if you like, of charities in New Zealand is a requirement for them to be transparent about what they're doing and how they're doing it. So, if I was to see a charity that was accumulating a whole lot of money rather than, and it didn't appear to have a good reason to me, rather than applying that for the charitable purposes, I may not think of them so favorably when they come to me and asking for a donation. So, transparency, putting sunlight on something is often said as the best disinfectant. That's a big part of the control that we have over charities in New Zealand, and we actually have an excellent charities register with a high level of information on it. It's just surprising that not as many people use it as perhaps could. But I think there is a real question around accumulations. New Zealand is an outlier in this particular area from the little that I've had a look out there, and that was also referenced in the issues paper. A lot of other countries have grappled with this by trying to enforce some sort of regime where charities are required to spend some of their accumulated funds every year. And then you get down to, well, how do you do that? What's an appropriate amount? And how then do we handle more complex issues? For example, an iwi that may be a charity that's worried not only about its whānau today, but also generations into the future and needs to balance those two sets of needs.
And Jenny, can I just say, just to briefly finish that thought, because I worry, and I think Craig does as well, that if charities are sitting on accumulated funds and they have $100 million and the trustees are so conservative and they're like, but we're saving it for the rainy day. We can't use it up because, we're waiting for the hard times that are coming. It's raining now, right? We have to have a mindset shift for people that frees them up as trustees to look at their SIPOs, which is their statements of investment performance objectives, and looks at their trustees and looks at that accumulated funds through the lens of why were they originally endowed with the money, and encourages those trustees to use it for those purposes. In my view, that could include doing what's called impact investing. So if you were originally endowed the money for a particular purpose, like supporting young people, then why not look at taking the money that you've got sitting in bank accounts where the profits go to Australian banks and use it instead for impact investing into social housing projects, as an example, where you're getting people into clean, green, energy efficient homes. So I think there needs to be a reframing around that particular topic as well. Just throw that in because I know there's people on this call who are trustees of large accumulated funds. So hopefully provoking some thinking there too.
Thank you. I'm wondering the questions in the chat are actually very, very consistent and very interesting. So I hope you've all got your chat up so you can see the issues that people are raising. But I'm wondering if it's worth just returning to donor-controlled charities again, because I know there is concern in the family philanthropic sector about whether or not this could potentially have a broader impact than what is stated in the paper. Craig, do you want to start on that one?
Yes. The paper only looks, was the IRD issues paper, or officials issues paper, only looks at this issue from an abuse perspective. And I think, firstly, that's very one-sided. I've acted for a number of family foundations over the years, and my goodness me, I have been so, so impressed by how generous these individuals and families are that have set these up and operate them. The concern of abuse is around abuse of the related party nature of the transaction. So because the person controls the company and also the foundation, that they may be doing things between those which advantage them rather than advantage the charitable purposes. I've never, in my 30 years of auditing, seen an example of that. I've seen huge number of examples of incredibly generous individuals who go out of their way to be generous and do things that are very uncommercial for themselves, but generous for the charities and putting more money into the foundations. I fully understand the concern of the IRD that may have seen some instances of abuse. I worry that we throw a blanket over the whole lot to address a few issues that there may be some abuse, rather than use a targeted approach rather than use a blanket approach. That would be my request on that. We are out of line with international countries on that, and I think there's a case for a good look at some other international examples around donor controlled and how other countries grapple with that. But I would also urge that that does need to be actually a really good, thoughtful look, and ensuring that we're comparing apples with apples. Often it's very easy to point to something that happens overseas without seeing the wider context of how those countries may support their charities or do things completely differently. So I'd hate to see a cherry picking solution to this rather than a good investigation of are there better ways of doing what we're doing.
Thank you. Stephen, do you want to comment on that one?
No, I think Craig summarized that really well. Yeah. I maybe one thing, just so it's clear, in the paper, Craig and I talked a lot about should we be designing a template submission? So in other words, just put your name at the top and then hit submit. And in the end, we reflected and thought that's not the best approach, because the officials, if they get, 500 that say the exact same thing, they're probably not going to absorb it. But that's why I'm encouraging in the chat, you've all been amazingly active. You're writing stories. Just copy paste those and start your submission. And the submission can be short. I did a submission on the recent Treaty Principles Bill, which is another example of, another topic. But that submission, it was literally 3 sentences. And just make sure that you're getting your voice heard, because I think if the volume comes through, and if there are real stories, as Jenny has emphasized, like how will this impact your situation, then I think that will help. And then don't just leave it to the submission, talk about it. I just would love it. I know we're all busy with the mahi, the work, heads down working, but let's lift our eyes up and start telling our stories in a way that's visible, so that it's not just about certain groups that are the front page of the headlines. Let's talk about the good work that we do. And then everyone on the call, next time you see one of the people here posting or talking about it, tautoko and support them and reshare it and tell someone else, and do it without even being asked. I just heard about this amazing charity. Look at their great work. Like, we've got to raise the atmosphere into the positive, rather than it being, oh, it's a negative thing. Charities are exploiting tax loopholes. I don't trust them. We got to change the narrative here.
I mean, one comment I'd like to make, and a number of you were at the meeting with Nicola Willis a few weeks ago. I mean, she's getting a lot of feedback from the general public who believe that charities are abusing their tax-free status. So I think we need a positive narrative and positive stories to counter that.
Can I suggest that, that comes largely from our media, and I feel really sorry for a lot of our media, because they are struggling with their commercial model now, and clickbait is such a popular form of media, and sadly we all know if it bleeds, it leads. So the capacity of the media, or the propensity of the media to use a negative story, they know they'll get more eyeballs on that. That just means that the sector needs to work harder to get those positive stories out there, which we all know there are countless thousands of positive stories there. We need to redress that balance, as it were. Jenny, could I quickly talk about FBT?
Mm-hmm.
Fringe benefit tax is a big advantage that charities currently get. So charities, for some perverse reason, aren't actually subject to fringe benefit tax at the moment. And a lot of charities, that's a considerable advantage. What it means is that they are able to offer remuneration packages, most commonly the use of a vehicle, and not be taxed on that. So it allows them to compete with for-profit businesses for labor resource specifically, but there's other FBT as well. The whole point of fringe benefit tax was to ensure that people weren't being tricky on personal remuneration and hiding the amount that was actually being paid to people so that there was a fairness in terms of remuneration on an individual's effort. I find myself schizophrenic on this because from a policy perspective, it makes no sense at all for charities to actually have the use of FBT exemption. However, a lot of charities benefit from this significantly at the moment. So it is a concession that exists at the moment. It doesn't really make a lot of logical policy sense if you go back to what FBT is actually for. However, it exists at the moment. I think what's important there, therefore, is for charities to actually submit in terms of, well, how important is FBT to them? Because if it's taken away, that's likely to be quite a big extra cost for you. Not only the cost of paying FBT on providing a vehicle to someone, but all of a sudden you've got to do FBT returns as well. So bang, there's compliance cost into the loop too. So I just wanted to point that one out there. It's one that at one level, I think actually it doesn't make sense for us to have this exemption as a sector. At another level, I know it's going to have a big impact. Jenny, you're on mute again. Someone has to.
That's right. We've only got a few minutes left, so what I'm going to do is, Stephen, ask you to sum up with high-level issues as you see them, then back to you, Craig, and then one of you might like to talk about what we are planning to do from here, I guess, the three of us, as we support you all in working through this issue. So over to you, Stephen, and then back to Craig.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you, Jenny, as well, for being willing to do this. It's really appreciated. And I'm sure everyone here, no doubt, will get a few comments and people will say thank you, but want to make sure that you know we appreciate you and the role that you've played in helping to pull these things together. Yeah, from my perspective, it's going to be echoing things I've said, which is this is an opportunity. I tend to be a glass half full person. Okay, so look at the glass half full, which is we get the chance to tell people about the amazing work that we do, and we get the chance to really lift the game in terms of how do we get supported? What does it mean? What is the role of charity within society? So I really hope, I mean, I don't know about you, Craig, but that was my favorite summertime project of the year was this paper. If you haven't read it, please skim read it at least, and then have a look through what we've done. I think it's important. I don't want to end in a negative way. Like, this is an opportunity for us to present the positive side of what charities do. And a lot in the paper is actually positive. We're going to have probably donation tax credit reform, and there might be some weird anachronisms from the distant past that get tidied up. And, you know, we're at least having this conversation. You know, I think there was 640 people that ended up signing up for this, talk, which shows that people are interested. So let's now carry that into submitting, carry it into telling good stories, and carrying it into tautokoing and supporting each other with the mahi that we're each doing. So that would be my encouragement, is that hopefully this paper helps you think through for yourself, and then you can submit.
Thanks, Stephen. Jenny, I've gone from annoyed to pleased. So I started off as annoyed because there was all of these annoying newspaper things making stupid claims that people seem to be adding to rather than refuting, to pleased that we've actually now got a consultation. And as short as it is, it's an opportunity. So I just, tautoko the comments in terms of please submit, people. We live in a democracy. Democracies only work if people use their voices appropriately. And voices, not just for now, but voices for the future. And I think, the Te Tiriti bill, as appalling as I personally found that, and that's just my personal views, I think it's actually had some real positives. You know, that Te Tiriti bill and the huge number of submissions that it's actually created has given a very clear message that actually there is strong support for Te Ao Māori in New Zealand, and it's part of our society and culture, and we need to keep grappling with it and handle it as best we can as a society. So, even something that's initially divisive can be positive if people do submit and make their voices heard. As a former standard setter and someone who used to release audit standards, these are not the most exciting things. We used to love submissions because it meant someone had actually read it and someone actually cared. And even if it was a one-line email, it was treated with grateful thanks because we got opinion back. So please, people, do make a submission. It can just be 1 or 2 lines in an email. That still counts. Um, I'm also pleased that, we've actually got some really good thinking people involved in this, and I'd like to actually tip my hat to the policy team at the IRD. And that might seem strange, but I was actually really pleased when I read their paper because it was well thought through, and actually there's a lot in there which is quite supportive of the charitable sector and actually dismissing some claims for which there's found to be no proof, such as charities running businesses compete unfairly with other businesses in New Zealand. And on that note, there's actually been a study. There hasn't been any studies in New Zealand. There has been some decent studies in Australia, and they've also conclusively found actually there's no proof of this unfairness of competition claim. So well done to the IRD people that we got there. But they need feedback, they need examples, they need to hear from the sector how the sector needs supporting.
Thank you. There's been a few questions in the chat that Craig, you might want to answer. When do they close? And some people are still not clear where they get a copy of the questions that IRD are looking for answers for. So can you just talk us through the process, please?
Sure. So the consultation process on the officials issues paper closes on the 31st of March this year. We have now written 2 papers. So one that Stephen's flashed up beforehand, or I can't see it on my screen, which was before the consultation paper came out. We've now written another one to help people with their thinking and their understanding of the issues paper. And what we will do at the end of this webinar is that we will send out a link to everyone in terms of our 2 papers and the issues paper so that you can see those and hopefully have all of the information there. On the issues paper gives the email address and postal addresses in which to get submissions in. So we'll make sure that that's sent to everyone and linked to you. Stephen and I have tried with the papers that we've done to explain the issues, give a bit more context to them to hopefully make it clearer to everyone what the issues are and to help you think about them, to help you talk to other people about them. Yeah, that's the aim of what we've been trying to do. So hopefully that's of use.
And just to carry on, so I'll take this video and put it into like a YouTube link so that you'll be able to share it with the boards or other people that you know. So you'll get an email from me probably later this afternoon, and it will have that. It will also have a link to the audio. So I do a podcast called Seeds, and so it will be an audio for people who like to listen as you're commuting. And that's a project that I've been doing for about 8 years now, more on inspiring people, but I use it as a platform to get messages out as well. And in the email, we'll put links to the IRD consultation paper, which other people and I have put into the chat now as well. And we'll put the links to these papers that we're talking about so that you'll have like a complete package, at least from Craig and Jenny and I, as of today, that you can then share with others. We don't mind if you forward it to others. We're also posting on LinkedIn. I think Craig and I use that quite a lot. So maybe watch there. I know both of us would love to connect with any of you who are on that platform so that we can keep supporting and getting messages out. So those are sort of the next steps as well from our perspective. And then finally, the chat has been amazing. There's so much content there. So I think what we'll do is try to pull out the text of it to be able to share it with everybody. If you don't want what you've typed there, shared, then let me know, I guess. But I think if you've put it in this format, then we'll take that as a sign that it's okay to share. This is the lawyer in me talking, right? But it's a lot of good content there, so I think it would be good to be able to share it out with the people who came to this call. So that might follow, because I have a feeling there's probably hundreds of messages there, and it might take a bit to format it. But
Great.
yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you. I'm going to wrap up in a minute, but one comment that Nicola Willis made was she wanted people to submit early, which I thought was interesting. There was a bit of an implication that she was probably going to be monitoring submissions as they came in, or someone was going to be monitoring them for her. So that was just a request from the minister that you submit early. I mean, maybe submit early and often, but at least early. And now I really do want to thank Stephen and Craig. These two extraordinary New Zealanders have done so much work on this. You should have seen my email inbox over the weekend. I was going to threaten myself to turn it off. So they have been working night and day, literally, on this issue on behalf of the sector. So I just want to thank you both very, very much for your energy, for your intellectual energy and intellectual input, for your insights, and for your really, really hard work on this matter. So I really can't thank both of you enough on behalf of the sector for the work that you've done. So I think on that basis, Stephen, we can close and get on with our day.
Yeah, so we'll the one other thing, Hui and Volunteering New Zealand are going to do a survey, so we'll put that as a link in the email that we send out as well. My encouragement is do the survey, but don't forget to submit yourself. So yeah.
Lovely.
Great.
I'd
Thanks,
just like to
everybody.
say thanks to everyone on the call for all of the fantastic work that all of you individually do in the charitable space, because that's the power of this sector, is fantastic people doing fantastic mahi. Well done to you all.
Yeah. Thank you.